1, 2, 1. Come on in, everyone. We are moments away from starting. Please come and grab a seat. I should have had Chris up on guitar playing some theme music. Dun, 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 dun. Or go, Anna. Yeah, or go, Anna. Solid rock. Yeah. Black fella, white fella. I'm going to start with an acknowledgement of country. In the spirit of reconciliation, we acknowledge the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung people of the Kulin Nations as the traditional owners of the land on which we meet. We pay our deep respects to the elders past, present and emerging. We are all people made in God's image and remember the words of the Apostle Paul in Acts 17:26. From one blood, God made all the nations who inhabit the whole earth, and he allotted the times of their existence and the boundaries of the places where they would live. It's my pleasure to welcome Uncle Glenn. Glenn has a number of titles. He's a canon at the cathedral. He's a reverend, priest. He sits on the chair for Natsiak, which I will get you to explain what that is. Author, priest, Wiradjuri man, painter, artist, heaps of things. And there's even artwork of yours in the cathedral, right at the opening of the doors of St. Paul's. So it's a great pleasure to have you with us today, and I understand, Uncle Glenn, that you come at a time that is significantly demanding on you and your family, so we really appreciate your time with us today. So we all, I extend our welcome on behalf of us all, but can we please put our hands together as Glenn comes up.
Well, thank you. Good morning. Darabadinya Badu, Wiradjuri Awa Nadi, Glen Loughrey. Gawambana, Yarandu Marang. I just spoke in my Wiradjuri language, which is not the local Wurundjeri language, and said, I am proud to be Wiradjuri. My name is Glen Loughrey, and Gawambana is very similar to what you would use down here as Woomajaka, and Yaradu Marang says, G'day. G'day, you lot. So it's nice to be here. I attach my acknowledgement to that which John just gave. I'm careful in all of these environments that we understand the protocol that is acknowledgement. John did not do a personal acknowledgement. He did an acknowledgement on behalf of those gathered here today, which includes me. So we don't need to do another one now, because we've already done one. My task today, and I'm having an interesting moment with the slideshow because I don't know where I am. We'll go back. Aha, that's it. Today I'm going to spend some time with you unpacking the statement from the heart. One of the sad things that's happened in the process for the referendum is that we have got focused on one small element of the statement from the heart and forgotten about that document and its importance in the whole process that is a part of what we do. We have got to think for ourselves, we've become to think for ourselves that the voice is everything. that it holds everything, that it's going to be the solution to everything. Well, in reality, the voice is only one of the 4 aspirations inside the statement from the heart. I'm not sure whether you've read the statement from the heart. I hope you have. How many people have read it? How many people have heard it? Okay. Can I suggest that the rest of you get a copy, put it on your bedside table on top of the Constitution, and you read the statement from the heart first before you go to sleep, because if you read the Constitution, you'll already be asleep. And if you read the statement from the heart, you will find that it is a very powerful document, but gentle. In it, there are no words that blame anybody for anything. There are no words that says this situation is your fault. There are no words that asks or demands revenge, reparation, or anything inside that document. The kind of words you will hear are simply call, seek, use that twice, ask, invite. None of it carries any words of a threat, of a demand. And it is a very powerful document in that sense. It doesn't shame you, and it doesn't guilt you. You are not responsible for what happened. You are responsible for making the changes necessary to repair what has happened. And I'll explain that in more detail in just a moment. What it does is that it asks us to walk together. It is an invitation. It's an act of absurd compassion and generosity from a people who have been decimated by dispossession and by those who came and by those who have benefited from that process, which is all of us in some way. But particularly those who came here ACP. Do you know what ACP means? After Cook and Phillip. There are 2 time zones in Australia, BCP, ACP. Before Cook and Phillip and after Cook and Phillip. But don't worry about the rest, there's only 2 that matter. And it just simply talks about the fact that if you've come here, the system in which you're a part of continues to dispossess us in so many different ways. But we continue to invite you to be generous and to be gentle and say we need to come together so we can walk into a better future for Australia. Not for Aboriginal people, not for non-Aboriginal people, not for Torres Strait Islander people, not for non-Torres Strait Islander people, but for Australia. All of us. So it is an act or a statement of transformational forgiveness. Transformational forgiveness. As Christians who come and worship in this space, we know what that means. We know about transformational forgiveness. We know how it acts in our own lives. But like all transformational forgiveness, we have to say, what? What? That was pretty... What if it... For all transformational forgiveness to work, we have to say what? No, yes. Yes to God. Yes to God. The sorry and the rest of the bits come later, but it's yes to God. So we have to say yes to this invitation and allow it to follow its process to lead us into a better future as a nation. I look at this statement from the heart in a circular manner because Aboriginal people like circles. If it wasn't going to cause chaos for your church, I would have got you all to sit in a circle. But then people would have been here all afternoon putting the chairs back. But we do stuff in circles. We have yarning circles, talking circles, listening circles. Remember, yarning circles are more likely to be listening circles because there's 25 people and only one person talking at a time. So you're listening. We sit in circles. We do our justice in circles. We do our politics in circles. We do everything inside a circle. And when you're on country and you stand in the middle of country, country is everything that is in the horizons around you. And what is that? A circle. I do it in this manner also to get us away from the idea of a linear model. A linear model that says we know where we are, we know where we're going, and we know all the risk management issues in between. The Western mindset to all things. If I ask you to do something, you'll go, we better think about this, and we've got to get that, and we've got to cover this, and we never get anything done because we're too busy doing that. Whereas in the Aboriginal model is that we don't have a word for straight line in most languages because BCP, you couldn't walk in a straight line. We hadn't knocked all the trees down, bulldozed all the rocks, you know. We had to walk in a wobbly fashion and sometimes in circles. So we don't go around this in a linear fashion, we wander around. It is a process that takes us from where we start to where we finish without really defining how that happens. And this is where one of the big things about the voice gets in the way of people. Where's the detail? Where's the risk management? They will look after themselves in our way of seeing the world. And the statement is written in a different world view, which also is why people find it difficult, in a different way of seeing things. So when I start in this process, because you know the statement from the heart came into being in 2017 after the Referendum Council had been asked in 2015 to find out how Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people wanted to be recognised in the Constitution. This is not a new thing. Every politician since the 70s has wanted to do this. Some of them wanted it in the preamble, some of them wanted it more substantive, but it's been a part of our politics since the 70s. It actually began in 1846 when the first letter was sent to Queen Victoria. And from then, we've had many different statements asking for the same thing. And we've had people like Uncle William Cooper, Uncle Pastor Doug Nichols, and others all writing letters, campaigning to get a voice for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. So this is not a new thing. And the present people involved in making this happen have been involved in it for 30 plus years. It's a process that has come together, and they did 12 dialogues across Australia in places that have nothing to do with Canberra. You know, this is not a Canberra thing. It comes out of the thinking of Aboriginal people on the ground, elders, grassroots Aboriginal people, 100 at each place, 12 to 1,300 people across the country. They all came up with the same four things: voice, treaty, truth, Makarrata. Voice, treaty, truth, Makarrata. And then they went to Uluru, they wrote the statement, And it's the statement from the heart signed at Uluru, not the Uluru Statement from the Heart. Because if you say the Uluru Statement from the Heart, it sounds like a Central Australian thing. If you say it's the Statement from the Heart signed at Uluru, it means that the Aboriginals and Torres Strait Islander people who have never been to Uluru or to Canberra are giving an invitation from their heart to the whole of Australia's heart. It's a heart thing, not a head thing. And that's to be remembered very clearly. So we start with voice. Why do we start with voice? Because if you're not heard, you're not seen, and if you're not seen, you don't exist. If you're not heard, you're not seen, and you're not seen, you don't exist. I notice there are some small people outside. Some stage or another, they were about that long. And they worked on that exact same model. True? There's some people who've been awake since 3 o'clock this morning because of that. They work on that exact same model. If you're not heard, you're not seen, and you're not seen, you don't exist. For Aboriginal people, that has been our issue. You know about terra nullius. What I'm talking about is persona nullius. Terra nullius means empty land. We know that's not true, but that's what it was meaning. Persona nullius means empty person. You don't have the right to make your own decisions. You don't have the right to have a voice. Others will always tell you what to do. Others will always want to protect you, fix you, make you right. Maybe I was right the first time. But it's all of this process, and it's all done to you because you're a persona nullius. That comes from the fact that we were never included in the Constitution at the beginning of the process. One of the reasons was that because Alfred Deakin, who was the architect of the Constitution, said that Aboriginal people are dying out, have died out in the south, and they're dying out in the north and the west, even though we treat them very gently. I don't know where he is in the afterlife, but if I get to meet him, I'm going to ask for a definition of gently. And he said, and even if you are slightly tinted in any way, you can't come to Australia. So I figure from that, don't go and get sunburnt. So he said that we weren't going to be here by the end of the 1900s because we were dying out. So don't include them in the Constitution, it doesn't matter. We're pretty stubborn, we haven't died out. We're still here. So we were excluded from the Constitution, which is the birth certificate of our nation, which is where the idea of sovereignty and of identification and of equality comes. If we were inside the Constitution at the beginning of the day, we would have been equals. We would have been equals. There's that verse that we get in Galatians 3:28, which talks about we're all one under Christ. We don't have to fit into the law. Well, the law here made sure we weren't one under Christ. Okay? What we're doing with this process is making Paul's statement, that theological statement, actually come true in the world. It's a very dynamic incision or insertion into the secular world because we're taking out race, we're putting us as equals. Because what you do when you put us inside the Constitution is you put our sovereignty next to the Crown's sovereignty. The Crown's sovereignty is hard, top-down, inflexible, law-based. Does that remind us of Paul? Kinda. And then we have the Aboriginal sovereignty, which is relational, kinship, connection, belonging. It's internal. It's what comes from within you. And it's flexible. It's in conversation. So when you put those two together, you end up with you don't put one on top of the other. Our sovereignty doesn't trump yours and your sovereignty doesn't trump ours. They sit together and have a conversation. And that conversation will change our nation. It's not a coup d'etat. It's a process of relationships that we're talking about with the idea of voice. So when you hear us, give us a voice, treat us as equals, you recognise that we actually exist. We're no longer persona nullius. We don't have time, but I could give you hundreds of examples of what I'm talking about. And later, if you want to ask me, I'll tell you. Once we've done that, we go to, and that's really important because once we've, whoa, what are we doing down there? How did that happen? There we are. Once we've done that, that's what's called recognition, okay? Once we've done that, once you know there's somebody else in the room, you come to this place where you can do a treaty, where you can agree on how you live in that space. That's part of what you have to do with that one that wakes you up at 3 o'clock in the morning. Gradually shift them to a more civilised time. But how do we live in this space? How do we share this place? If I now can see you, I can no longer ignore you. Therefore, I have to come to an agreement with you as to how we share this space together. That's all a treaty is. That's all a treaty is. A treaty is saying, how do we live together? Some of you may remember living in shared houses. Yeah? Who got the top shelf of the fridge? Who got the bottom shelf of the fridge? Who got to bring their boyfriends or their girlfriends over on what Friday night? Or who parks here? You had to do all that stuff, didn't you? And I've been in shared houses where we actually had to sign it off at the bottom like a legal document. So that's all we're talking about here. How do we share this space together? Don't have the fears. Remember, it is simply, now that we've heard you, we now know that we have to live together. And as we live together, we will develop over time a way of doing that. Now remember this, this kind of transformation, cultural transformation, takes up to 7 generations. Now, if you take it from a biblical sense, that just means a long time. But it could be literally 7 generations. If that's the case, we're a couple of generations in, we've got a few generations to go, so we're not going to treaty next Tuesday. Okay? We have to get the voice in place, and then over time we'll go to treaty. Some of us in this room won't see that, because we're differently young. Or we are youthfully challenged. I'm not sure what the right word is. But some of us won't see that process. But our grandchildren will. Our great-grandchildren. That's why I work inside schools, because they're going to have to pick this up and make it work going forward. I wish I could get them to vote. We wouldn't have to do this. Because they'd all go, yeah, what a good idea. So we get to there, and we now have this process sometime in the future that we do treaty. Once you're seen and once you agree to work things out, you go to the bottom of that process. When we do treaty, the thing that we do there is actually conciliation. We've never done conciliation in Australia. We've never been one. I know the national anthem says we're one and free. That's aspirational. That's aspirational. We will get there, and we'll be able to sing that from here at some stage. But it's aspirational. We have never actually hit conciliation. Once we've done, we go down to truth. And today, truth is about, I could do it for you visibly, Aboriginal people like me taking their clothes off and showing the scars. But that might be too much. But it's about us getting up and telling you how bad things have been, all the terrible things that has happened to us. And it has a purpose. It's a part of the education, but it's not necessarily the whole of the truth-telling that needs to occur. It's not us that has to tell our colonial memory. It's you that also has to tell your colonial memory. The worst stories I hear are from people who are youthfully challenged, who come to me in their 80s and say, I remember stories of what my grandfather and great-grandfather did to Aboriginal people, and I want to tell somebody about them. They've carried them through 2 generations, those stories, without telling anyone. And they've wanted to come and tell me about how bad those things were. And they want to clear up that colonial memory. The colonial memory that says, how come I am so privileged? Oh, that's right. It's because others were dispossessed. And how do I live with that? Sometimes we want to say, I want to fix it. Other times, as we hear in this debate, we have people who want to defend it and who want to say it's all okay. So we have to make choices. But that comes to that truth-telling. And once we start to tell each other how it feels to be in this space, either privileged or dispossessed, we start to find an interesting thing. We have similar feelings. And we start to find common ground. And that truth starts to reconcile us through empathy. It's powerful. Powerful, powerful, powerful. You know, one of the things about this story is you have to do... You know you've got 2 brains, don't you? You know you've got 2 brains? Eh? Well, you don't know. Well, you do. You have 2 brains. You have the brain that sits under your hat, just up here. That's the logical, rational brain that makes all the plans, does all the risk management, then comes up with the excuses when it all fails. Up there. Then you have another brain. This is Aboriginal thinking. You have another brain, and that's your big brain. And I'm in Mensa. That's my excuse for not doing exercise, because if I do exercise and lose weight, I won't have the same brain power. This is the brain where you feel things. You know that word, gut reaction. Why? Where do I feel uncomfortable? It's here. When you have anxiety, where does it sit? It sits here. It's a very Hebraic idea, but it's also very much the way we think. So in this truth-telling, we have to get you out of your head and into your gut, to where you feel. That's the whole question of the voice is, what does it feel like? What feels like the right thing to do? Forget about the worrying. We'll all have worries. We'll all have those things whirring in our head. But we have to come back to what is the right thing to do. And that comes out of here. Now, when we've done that, that's when we get true reconciliation. Now, we use this process, BCP, inside our communities to resolve conflict. It was conflict resolution processes. Remember, we probably have sitting in this room 2 tribes. Okay? Because our tribes weren't much bigger than the groups on either side of the room. And in that case, if you had conflict between any members of the group and you're in the middle of the desert, it ran the risk of fracturing the whole group down the centre and then putting everybody at risk. So you had to resolve it and resolve it as quickly and as appropriately as possible. So we used this kind of process. We'd get the people who were causing the trouble into the centre of the room, put a circle of elders around them, put a circle of community around them, and then we would ask them to tell us their story. We'd give them a voice, and they'd tell their own version of the story. And after they had a chance to tell their own version, we'd go down to treaty. Okay, you both told us their stories. Can you agree on what it really is? Can you get rid of the embellishments and start to say what really did happen? Once they've agreed on what really did happen, we go down the bottom to the truth section. How did that make you feel? What did it feel like for both of you to be in that place? And what did it feel like for the community watching on? And once you've done that, there would be a decision that someone would need to repair the community. Sometimes that person was selected, or sometimes that person was self-selected and would say, yeah, I was the dodgy one in this whole process. I'll repair the community. And repairing the community was done through a spearing. Now, we didn't make him stand at the other side of the room and throw a spear, because there's no guidance systems on those things, and that could end up with a disastrous impact. What happened was there was a ceremonial spear that would have been put into the thigh, and into the thigh so that the person wouldn't be able to walk the same way. It's not punishment, not payback. It's pedagogical. It's learning. The person who gets the spear in the thigh learns a number of things. The kind of behaviour that was inappropriate, the kind of thinking that brought about that behaviour. They learn that their narcissistic thinking that they're the number one person in the whole world and everything revolves around them disappears, because there's no I in mob, only an O. Not I, others. So he learns then that he has to rely on everybody in this small group to look after him or her at that time. Even the person who put the spear in the thigh has to help care for him. If you don't rely on the community, you don't eat, because you can't run to catch a kangaroo. You hop, but it hops faster. Okay? So you have to be cared for. And the community sitting around goes, that kind of behaviour is inappropriate, that kind of thinking is inappropriate, so they learn as well. It's a pedagogical moment. It's a repair, not a punishment. And as a result of that, the person walks with a limp for some time, remembering what brought him to that place, and the justice and the reparation. See, reparation isn't always about money. You mob think it's all about money. Every time we make reparation, I see people in the audience go like that. Put their hand on top of their wallet, not getting any of mine. Or they think we're coming for their house. And I go, no, I don't want your house. It's 2 stories. Too big. Your neighbours, though. It's only a joke. So it's not about those kind of material things. This is about reparation to repair the fracture that split us from the beginning. Yes, at times. And remember, if this is the 7th generation, by the time we get to Makarrata, we'll have developed relationships and trusts and all the rest of it. And by the time we get there, we'll have a pretty good idea what we're going to do as a community. As a community. It's a process. It's powerful. But it's been lost because there's people called politicians who don't listen to these things. So we get there, and it's, you know the story of Jacob. Jacob rips off Esau, takes his birthright, disappears, gets a couple of wives, has some children, gets a lot of animals, becomes rich. 25 years later, he says, I'm going home. But he's not real sure how that's going to go. Is Esau going to be friendly? Or has Esau for 25 years built up a grudge that got bigger and bigger, and it's built around the head of Jacob? So he doesn't know. So he gets to Peniel, the river, and he stays there, and he says to the family, oh, darlings, will you take the children and the animals and go off and meet Esau? See how he is? I'll wait here. That's the bravest thing a man could ever do, because when he meets the two wives later, whoo, that's not going to go well. But he stays at Peniel, and overnight he wrestles with an angel. Is it God? Is it an angel? And he wrestles all night. I think what he was wrestling with there was a young man, 25 years before, of what he did, how he behaved, what was the consequences. He's trying to come to grips with himself. And the conversation he has is about the blessing is, I have to forgive myself. One side of him is asking the other side of him to bless him. Okay? Powerful moment. And when he wakes up in the morning, he has a new name, Israel. But he also has a dislocated hip. And he walks forever with a limp. In the memory of that graced moment when he could live with himself. Now, it didn't make him perfect, and none of this is going to make anybody perfect, but it set him up for the next stage of his life. So he goes off and he learns to walk with a limp. When we get to Makarrata, what will happen is Australia will look at its behaviours and things that it's done, make the changes, do the apologies, and move forward with a limp. Not out of punishment, but out of repair. In Western Australia, this is happening in a place called Bunbury, where the Bunbury Bishop and his team have worked with the elders for a number of years. I think they're into the 10th or 12th writing of an apology. And they're going to do an apology on the 30th of August to the local Aboriginal people. And the apology isn't just for the actions of the church, but the apologies for the actions of the Anglicans that attended the church. The big thing about that is they're only doing it to one clan. Then they're going to go off and do it to the next clan, but they're going to go through the same process again. They're going to go and do the same process again. What a powerful way to recognise, to repair. Not by just throwing out words to say we regret what we did to everybody and think it's a blanket process, but by working. That diocese is learning to walk with a limp as an example of what we can do. And what we get to here is justice and wholeness at the centre of the circle. We don't get reconciliation. Reconciliation in its modern form is just making black fellas like white fellas. You know, oh, isn't he great? You know, he's an associate professor at ANU. That's me. So that makes him more like us. You know what I'd love to be able to do? I'd love to be able to walk down to you here and go, here's your doctorate of Aboriginal bush medicine, and you're going to become an Aboriginal doctor. That would be better. That's more powerful. But we never do that. We only go, oh, that black fella's come more like a white fella. I want a white fella to become more like a black fella. Does that make sense? If we have some time, we've got time, that really sets up that process of thinking about what we're talking about, because the voice is just the opening, the door to the process which will bring about repair sometime in the future. We don't need to be arguing about treaty. We don't need to be arguing about how we do truth-telling. We don't need to be arguing about Makarrata. We simply have to listen to our gut and say yes. Because see, we've offered you your birthday and Christmas presents all at once. You know that, don't you? We've given you a box that says when you open it up, you have the opportunity to say yes. Doesn't matter whether you put a tick or a cross. I know that's worrying a whole lot of people at the moment, but really, trivia. But it's, if you say, you have the opportunity to say yes. If you say yes, we tell you to open up the other box, which is a gift, got a pretty bow on it. And you open that up and it says, now that you've said yes, you have the opportunity to shape your yes to be useful for purpose through your democratic process of legislation done by your democratic representatives. We're not even going to tell you how to do it. We don't tell you how it should be. This is part of the gift. We want to see you live up to your yes. Now remember, we're not going to tell you how to do it, but when you do it, we'll tell you got it wrong. No, we will, but we will. But we're not going to tell you how to do it, because for 250 years we've been told how to do it. And it's not productive. So we're going to give you the opportunity to make those decisions for yourself. That's a fairly powerful way of thinking about it. I'm just going to duck through a few of the frequently asked questions to help you out with some of those. People say, what's it really all about? It's about recognition. It's about recognising us as your equals and putting us in the Constitution where the equality can be lived and become part of the ongoing national conversation. Very simple. Voice is just the mechanism of the recognition. It's just the rubber on the road. What is the voice going to talk about? It's going to talk about stuff that matters to us. And yes, there are people who say, but everything matters to us. Of course it does. Everything matters to you too. But there will be some things of real importance for us that will be the processes by which the voice will operate. Because the voice is going to be enshrined in the Constitution and can't be moved without a referendum, it will allow us to develop long-term thinking about the issues that relate to us. Housing, water, health, all of those issues, education, which at the moment are in a constant whirlpool of electoral cycles. Every 6 years we get a new parliament, 10 years. Policies change simply because they did it that way. We're not going to do it that way, so we change it. The funding bodies change. We've just gone through here in Victoria, suddenly people like Mullumbimby gathering place, the gathering place we're developing at St Oswald's, the Murnong First People's gathering place, we don't qualify for funding because we can't be seen as under education or under health, even though what we provide is the place where people can talk about the issues that matter for them. So funding goes up and down. We need to get what the voice will allow us to have is a long-term view, with the voices coming from our own people who will be elected across Australia or selected as part of a process inside of Australia. And if you want to look at some models for that, go to the Langton-Karma report, or the Karma-Langton report, and that will give you some models, 24, 5 people in the large one, smaller but similar kind of process in the regional ones, and they will work together to provide a voice. Remember, the voice can't veto anything. Can't veto anything, and just tell you, we think this might work better if we did it that way. And it'll tell that to executive government because they're the guys that write the paperwork. And why should we wait till the paperwork gets to Parliament House for us to say you can't do that just because this, and this, and you've got to go back and redo it again? Let us talk to them first. It's called consultation, self-determination. Gives us an opportunity to save money. So we can't veto, we don't deliver any services, and we don't handle money, because over the years, ATSIC and others have been blamed for not handling money properly. So we've decided amongst ourselves that now we'll leave the handling of money to the experts, the government. But we will leave. We're not going to be able to handle any money. It'll be how they look after us. So that's all important to understand. We have no right to make decisions. Like I hear all kinds of things that the Voice is going to levy tax on everybody's house. No, we're not. We're not. It's not going to happen. That we're going to want to take people's property or whatever. Even the most radical of the people involved will say to you, and I'm talking about Michael Mansell and others, will say to you, if you live in it, we don't want it. If you live off it, we don't want it. If you run a business out of it for the rest of us Australia, we don't want it. And if the government's using it, we don't want it. But if it's not being used, perhaps there's an arrangement we can come together for. And he was probably the most radical. So we're not after any of those things. It's kind of to assess how that works. People say, is it about race? You're giving one group of people more, giving on people special treatment that other people don't get. Well, can I just suggest you go and listen to Paul Kelly's song, Special Treatment? And that will describe the special treatment Aboriginal people have got. We've never had special treatment in a positive sense of the word. We are the people who've had the more and the less. The more of the things you don't want, and the least of the things that you do want. So we're not going to put us in there, is not going to give us stuff that nobody else has got. For the first time, we'll get the opportunity to speak to Parliament and government, just like the 819 lobbyists who got an orange card to visit people in Canberra Parliament House in the last 12 months. We'll get to do that. But it'll be in the Constitution and it can't be taken away from them. They can lose their orange card, we won't. And that's a good thing. See, in NATSIAC, because John said, what's NATSIAC? National Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Anglican Council. We've been going for 32 years. We follow exactly the same model as the Voice, because we are a voice to General Synod of the Anglican Church. Over the years, we provided them with advice. Sometimes they listen, sometimes they don't. Sometimes we do it well, sometimes we don't. But over the time, things have changed and continuing to change. That's the story that we have here, and that's what's going to happen here. So the race issue, when people say, this is giving people more power based on race, and I go, yeah, that happened somewhere between BCP and ACP. Okay? When Cook and Phillip got here, race took over the country. And one of the things we have to be careful about reading the scriptures is we don't read it from a racist point of view, from our race. That it gives credence to what we think the world should look like, because that's not what it does. In a sense, that's what Paul's talking about. It's what Jesus did. And Jesus did Makarrata, don't you? The last act on the cross was a spear in the side. And the first thing he did when he saw Thomas was lift up his shirt and say, hey, I did Makarrata for you. Now you lot go and walk differently. Walk with a limp. These are powerful things. I think some people want to know what are the different no voices. I often get asked, when you come to speak, can we get somebody to do the no case? And I go, well, if you're going to get somebody to do the no case, you need to get Pauline Hanson, the bloke from the National Party, Peter Dutton, Jacinta and Warren, and Lydia. And they go, no, we just want somebody for the no case. I said, there are at least five different no cases. They are not the same. They are not the same. So if you're going to heft them, you've got to get them all in the room. And best of luck with that. And the reason why I say that is Jacinta and Warren really work from a neoconservative, neoliberal position that says if you become part of the economic model that runs the country, you will be upwardly mobile and will resolve the issues that relate around us. Because that's what I did. I worked hard and I was very determined, and that's how I got to where I am. And both of them have written that. That's not me just paraphrasing, that's what they've written. But that's their thinking. So they want to deal with the issues by getting people to be upwardly mobile. It's very hard to pull yourself up by your bootstraps if you haven't got any boots. But that's the kind of idea that sits behind much of what they talk about. The Liberal Party is very much that kind of concept of linear, we want detail, we need to know how it's going to work. That's their kind of thinking, but it's also a very political position that they take. So it's a political no. I'm not sure about the National Party because they said no before anything was ever said. They said no right at the beginning. So they're against the concept of any kind of voice for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Lydia Thorpe is the only one in that group that has an alternative. She gets all the flack and all the hard time, but, and if you saw her on, who saw her on a press club? Yeah, she was good. She was scary. She was truthful. She didn't miss, but she's good. And I wanted you to notice something. Those that saw that, and she said she's going to retire in 5 years. I don't know whether she'll even make that far, actually, because every time she was standing there as Lydia Thorpe in a room of non-Aboriginal people, and not many of them. It was extremely sad to see how many people didn't bother even go to hear what she had to say from the press. So they're just going to work out of their stereotypes. And you could see her that as she was trying to talk, she was doing that drag of breath before she went to an and she was trying so hard to maintain herself in that space. And that is really difficult for our people. That's why we need this collective voice. Individuals who get up and do what I do, and I tell a lot of jokes and it looks like it's fun, but it ain't fun. And for Lydia, there ain't no fun. She knows that every time she opens her mouth, someone's going to take a shotgun at her. But she has to talk about what matters to her. And the same thing happens to me. I mean, I get lots of people come up to me and go, what's the definition of an Aboriginal? Looking at my face. I go, oh, tell me about it. Or, I don't trust fake and elite Aboriginals looking at me because my skin colour. My brother is much darker. He does the colour and I do the culture. But you get that ask. And like when they say you're a fake Aboriginal, I go, hey, here's a hint. Go and do your ancestry DNA. How much Australian are you? There is no code for Australian. People identify as Australian because their parents were born here and their grandparents were born here. And you're allowed to. The tax office thinks it's the best thing possible because they wouldn't make much out of the 3% of us. They need you to run the country. So I say to them, look, you can't judge us on the basis that you can't even fulfil that statement yourself on the statement you think we should be. Mr. Gray said that Mr. Johns, said that we need to go and if we want to get welfare, we have to go and get our DNA checked. And I said to him, well, that'll work out interestingly. If we apply that across Australia, there'll be so much money for me because nobody else will qualify. What a silly statement. So I get that all the time. When they say elites, I go, well, that's an interesting one. I'll go and see Mr. Chalmers and tell Mr. Chalmers that he can save a lot of money. Don't do the Closing the Gap program, because once we get educated, articulate, we become elites and you don't listen to us anyway. So why I mean, it's just crazy, some of this stuff. Do you have questions? Yes, sir. Yes, you. I don't know whether there's a mic, is there?
Before I start, I just want to draw people's attention. I think it's wonderful that we are supporting Noongar College in training ministers in 3 different denominations, Indigenous people, to minister to their own people, which I think is great. Thank you for your presentation. It's concerning that what you have said doesn't come out of the government, the presentation of either Yes campaign, and unfortunately it's become an acrimonious campaign. You mentioned yourself, politicians get in the way. Practically, also I guess there are so many deficiencies of what's happened in different schemes, in different bureaucracies trying to manage or pretending to manage those schemes. But it behoves the church to also challenge politicians, the press. The press are not involved in bringing up very, very few issues like Catherine, Alice Springs and some of these issues where something needs to be done. And just seeing what politicians have done since this referendum question has arisen, and on that I think everybody would agree to the recognition part. I don't think there would be any argument. Unfortunately, it's been tied in with a voice which hasn't been explained like you've explained it. How realistically is the voice going to make a difference with politicians who have shown that they don't really change, don't really listen, because there have been calls for, there have been voices before. So the first question is, how's that voice or the group that are going to advise the government going to be selected, representing so many different groups and nations? And secondly, I guess, what difference is it going to make to what's been happening up till now and doesn't seem to be changing in the opinions of what government's representatives are saying?
Okay, look, you've opened up a Pandora's box with a whole lot of things in there that I could spend the next half hour unpacking. One of the reasons why we have things like Catherine, Wadeye, Alice Springs, is because when people are dispossessed of everything that gives them life, the only thing they have left to protest with is their body, is what they have on, their body. That's why we ended with Jesus on the cross, his body. And Aboriginal kids, they grew up those kids in Alice Springs grew up living the consequences of the second invasion of Australia, the Northern Territory Emergency Response, which was built on a whole lot of misinformation, FUD I call it, false, unsubstantiated disinformation. And that meant that their communities were completely, where they lived, outside of Alice, were completely decimated. The councils were taken away, all the resources were taken away, all their money was taken away, which didn't belong to the government, belonged to the communities, And those kids saw their communities decimated again and fall apart. So they're in Alice Springs, in town camps, unable to take part in normal society, and they're protesting out of that. So all the kind of processes you put in place aren't going to resolve those unless we start to give Aboriginal people a voice about things that matter to them. A voice isn't going to solve that issue in the short term. It's going to build the basis, the foundation on which over time we'll resolve those issues. When we start to know and understand that people hear us and listen to us, take notice to us, and we are pragmatic people. We know there'll be governments that will be less interested than other governments. But because it's in the Constitution and they have to have us, we'll just wait. I think Vincent Loughrey said, we know how to wait. We know how to wait. You know, just think about 1901, we were told that there would be never anybody from Southeast Asia living in Australia. I'm glad they did, because I don't like pork pies and I much prefer the food from South Asia. Okay? So there's a gentle hint then that things are changing. But what I'm trying to say to you is it will, over time, change the processes as we begin to be taken seriously and our kids can see that they have the opportunity to be taken seriously. And that will build. If we get through this and it's successful, on the Sunday morning, I suspect I'll walk just a little bit taller, a little bit surer, a little bit about the fact that Australia has noticed me. I no longer have to fight. I will have to fight, but I no longer am in that very negative position. I've got a lot more questions to come. So, answering your question, it will resolve those issues going forward. Governments will fail us at times. We just have to stay strong and in the process. We have to be there. We have to ensure that we don't allow them off the hook. If we can get 60% of Australia and 4 states to say yes, that's a fairly powerful set of circumstances they have to look after. Because at the next election you might ditch them if they've been dodgy, because they haven't done what you've asked them to do, not what we've asked them to do. Does that answer it? Oh, the selection? Yeah. The state, the Carmel Langton report, which is the only model we really have, and one of the reasons why Albanese can't answer those questions for you is he doesn't have a majority in the upper house. There'll be horse trading over this thing. If he'd had the majority in the upper house that he could rely on, he'd be telling you now exactly how it was going to work. But he can't do that because he could be gazumped in the upper house. So it's going to work in that there'll be something like the country will be broken up into a number of regions. Those regions will then select people who will go to Canberra. They'll be in the seat, a bit like wardens and parish councillors are in the church, for a 6-year period or something similar, and you have to bop out for a while and then come back. They can't stay there and they can't build up a dynasty. So we get people changing over, and they'll come from various parts around Australia. Don't be scared of the idea that not every Aboriginal community will be represented. That's only become a major issue since the 70s. Prior to that, even Mansell and Co. and Charlie Perkins and that, they campaigned for Aboriginal Australia. They didn't campaign for their own groups. And neither did William Cooper, for the whole Aboriginal community. They hadn't seen the Axis map. Okay, when we got self-determination through Whitlam, and then we got the Axis map, suddenly the government said, this is clever. I can split these people up and say it's cultural. okay? And we, because we need the money, have become a slave to that map. Okay? Does that make sense? And what we have to get ourselves thinking about again is this is about the betterment of the whole of the Aboriginal community in Australia, the whole of the Torres Strait Islander community in Australia, not my mob. Because like the Canaanite woman we'd heard about last week, dogs get the scraps under the table, we fight over the scraps. What we have to do is come together so we're not doing that. And if we do that in our mindset, we will then have people in the Canberra who won't be thinking about their mobs at home, but about how it affects the whole of Australia. In past, I've been CEO of a number of national bodies, Australian Funeral Directors, Australian Association Executives, and a number of others. And every state had a representative on that board. And the first thing I would say when they sat down at the table, you are not here representing Western Australia. I expect you to make decisions today that will benefit the industry and the people of Australia, not your particular group of members, because you're a member of the Australian Association of whatever. And what we have to get our Aboriginal people to begin to go back to thinking like that. Because we never had boundaries. You know, we wandered in and out of each other's countries like it was a public convenience. You know, we shared areas where we could do smokings and welcomes on the same place. We shared sacred sites. We allowed people to come and use the river when the eels were running because where they lived they didn't get any food. We allowed this process. We trekked through these places, we had corroborees, because that's how you got wives and husbands. Corroborees might have been told that they were very sacred cultural exercises, but really it was speed dating. It was, because in this group of people here, you can't marry anybody in it. Can you really? So you have to get this mob together, and to widen the pool, you bring in a few others. And you have a corroboree. Yeah, you do sacred business, but you also, that's about how you do trade, that's how you do marriages. And then the culture from here goes to there. Some language, some practices. So you share things. That's what it was like before. But we get this bloody map and they put all dark lines down it and the government says, oh, I know who that belongs to. No, you don't. But you split us up by doing that. Does that make sense? Look. Oh, yeah, the government mob. Yeah, I've been trying to find space on Christmas Island, but... Yes. Hang on. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I know, and I'm very sad about that. I've been trying to get this process spoken to into ABC and all the radio stations, but I'm not controversial enough. I'm not angry enough. And I did an interview for ABC for the Drum last week and my interview never got up because technical difficulties. But they got somebody on who was angry, and that fitted their storyline. And that is what we fight and have difficulties with. You want me to finish? Somebody else had a question here.
It's okay, but isn't the detailed argument a bit campaigned? After all, would the Australian Constitution have ever got up if they used that argument there's no detail? Because it's a very small, minimalist
When you look at the statement, yeah, that's right, and that's one of the... Deakin was pretty clever. He gave us an adaptable document. And the tax laws in that simply say the Commonwealth can do taxes as long as it doesn't upset the states. You could fill this room with tax law. Detail comes later. And the people who are asking for detail are, sorry, Peter, but you will actually be doing it. You're a parliamentarian. You have the opportunity to speak in Parliament about this thing. You'll do the detail. So why upset us by asking for it now?
Thank you so much, Uncle Glenn, and thanks everyone for staying for this length of time today, straight after the service, and listening to what Uncle Glenn had to say. Can I pray for you?
Yeah, you can pray for me. I need it.
Yeah, look, we recognise what you've said about this is a taxing thing for you to do, despite all the jovialness and laughs and everything. I know that this is wearing on you, and it's a huge task, but I really thank you for what you're doing in answering a lot of our questions and getting us to understand the whole process. I think it's very heartening from my perspective. Let me pray. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for Uncle Glenn and for the work that he is doing. Lord, we pray that you would energise him, keep him motivated, keep him trusting in you. Lord, for myself, I do pray that the voice of Indigenous people will be heard, and I pray for them as well that they will feel heard. Lord, we know that you bring unity, and we pray for unity in this country. Be with Glenn and in this task that he is doing, in the information that he has given. We thank you for his work. Bless him in that. We ask in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you, brother.
Can I just say two quick things? You mentioned the Bible College. What you have to be talking to the church is about those people when they go out into communities don't get paid. Okay? They need to be paid. And we at NASIAC are going to start a little process to try and get that done. So if you have any influence in those areas, ask, how are they being paid? I think it's important they're there. I'm not saying they shouldn't be there, but they need to be recognised. I mean, if I go to work up there, I'll be paid. If a white person goes to work up there, they'll be paid. Those people need to be looked after as well. So that's just one little thing. The other thing is that we're working on the diocese, and if you have any influence here, is to set up a statewide Aboriginal network of archdeacons in each of the dioceses, plus a bishop. They want to make it an archdeacon in Melbourne, and I said we need to have a bishop for a state. Because dioceses don't have archdeacons running them. And our people don't know what an archdeacon is anyway. Most here don't. So we want to be able to lift it up to the level where our people are being heard inside the church. They're not in the bottom because they're not seeing anybody at the top. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for your presence and time.